Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to speak to the resolution that's before the committee, which is a resolution to enter into an investigatory hearing. As you are aware, under New Jersey law, the Township Committee is responsible for overseeing the affairs of the Township. The Township Committee is therefore statutorily authorized to investigate any activity of the municipality. It is further authorized by law to administer oaths and examine witnesses, as well as issue subpoenas for testimony or documents on matters within its jurisdiction. At the August 13th, 2019 Township Committee meeting, the Township Committee adopted a motion to, among other things, schedule tonight's special meeting and to enter into an investigatory status to review certain activities of the municipality and to potentially compel testimony based upon discussions in executive session. On September 3rd, 2019, the Township Committee met in executive session to obtain legal advice on the holding of tonight's meeting and requested the sworn testimony of 3 individuals as part of tonight's proceedings. Mr. Victor Stevens, the Township Director of Infrastructure, Mr. Francis Mullen, the Holmdel Township Engineer of T&M Associates, and Ms. Donna Vieira, the Township's former Administrator. Based upon this direction received from the Township Committee, the Acting Administrator and I reached out to Mr. Stevens and Mr. Mullen respectively to discuss this request as they are currently employed or retained by the Township. They each agreed to voluntarily attend tonight's investigatory hearing, which I would personally express my appreciation to them for their cooperation in this endeavor, and we will hear from them shortly. Strictly because she is no longer a Township employee, the Township issued a subpoena for the testimony of the Township's former Administrator, Donna Vieira. Her counsel indicated that she was unavailable to attend tonight's hearing, but is available to provide testimony on September 23rd, 2019 at 8 p.m. Accordingly, the Township issued a new subpoena for this latter date, and the Township Committee has expressed its intent to schedule a special meeting for that evening. If it's acceptable to the committee, I would recommend adoption of this resolution to enter into an investigatory hearing, after which the governing body may begin to hear from witnesses. If the committee has any questions, I'm here at your disposal and able to answer them.
Moved.
Second. Roll call. Roll call.
Mr. Bontempo?
Yes.
Mr. Critelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas?
Yes.
Dr. Pascucci?
Yes.
Mayor Hines?
Yes.
Okay, so, yeah. Sure, it's up to you.
The way I perceive the questioning, I would prefer that the engineer come first because I have some questions for him that might impact on the township's employee. Fran.
Okay.
Let's call Fran forward.
Mr. Mullen, could you please raise your right hand and place your left hand on the Bible and state your name for the record?
Francis Mullen.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess, thank you, Wendy. I guess I've spoken offline with many of the members of the committee. I think the way that we've collectively envisioned tonight is that, each committee member will have an opportunity to ask questions of the individuals. We would ask the public to be respectful of the process and mindful that there is no public commenting as part of the investigatory proceeding. It's strictly between the witnesses and the members of the Township Committee.
So, can we make an opening statement? How do we want to proceed?
I think it's up to the committee and the mayor. If you want to recognize each individual, I assume everyone's going to have a crack
We're
at
gonna
that.
just go down the line. Rocket, want to start us off?
All right, I'll start you off and then I'd love to get into the questioning. I'm the one who, with the help of other committee members, pulled the $31,000 bill from T&M in question. $2.1 million was placed on a consent agenda under bills payable. Then we found out, that prep work was done by T&M and Township Committee workers before it was even placed on the agenda. I never heard of this, never discussed this in public or private session with anyone. I find that irregular, unethical, and maybe illegal. My working hypothesis is that T&M was ordered to do this. They didn't do it on their own. That the administration and probably 2 Township Committee members directed, ordered, whatever you want to call it, that these things be done. The $2.1 million field and the prep work, which was substantial. I would like to question each of the people here today on especially the swim club project, but probably a couple other projects too. I would like to see how each of these individuals that are here tonight interact with the township, how the township interacts with them, and their perception of the chain of command. So that's where I'm coming from, and I really need to do the questioning today. Don't enjoy it, but need to. Thank you.
You want to just do the questions, Rocco? And then,
I think probably best to be.
No, let's do that. You
Yeah.
ask the questions, and
Okay.
then we'll, if you want to say something before you ask the questions, make your point.
All right, Fran, known you for a long time. How long have you worked for T&M?
I am with the firm just over 9 years.
And how long have you been the Holmdel Township Committee's engineer?
I was appointed January 2018, and then again in January 19.
Before that, are you aware of how long T&M has been the engineers for Holmdel?
I know it's a long time. I believe it's 30, 35.
So you're
years.
familiar with the process on how things work in this township?
Yes, I believe I am.
Okay. My main question is, the swim club, who ordered you to do the work there?
I got my direction directly from the administrator.
In writing, by phone call, by email, carrier pigeon, how?
Some of it was initially phone calls to alert me to what I was to do or what was being requested of me, followed by a series of meetings, and then ultimately email and written correspondence.
Is it usual when you or anyone else does a project like this that you submit to the administrator a list of how much it's going to cost and a limit not to exceed?
Yes,
Did you do that?
yes, I did.
Did she respond back?
She did.
In writing, email, how?
Certainly, she called me, and we talked on the phone a number of times, and then ultimately, she emailed me.
So you do have an email from her saying that you should do this work?
Yes, there's an email I recall specifically that said, proceed and make this your top priority, or something to that effect.
Did any township committee person give you any orders to proceed with this project?
No,
Not by phone, in person, email, text, in any way?
not that I recall ever getting direction from any elected official, any of the township committee people.
Did any of the township committee people call you about the project or talk to you or interact with you any way about the prep work on this field?
The only interaction I would ever have would be at either before a township committee meeting or after. As we greet each other coming to the meeting, someone might ask me to look at a pothole or look at a particular issue, but for this particular project, no.
No one showed up at the site or anything like that to talk with you? Or
Not when I was
around?
involved, Committeeman, not when I was on the site.
Are you aware of anyone else from T&M interacting with them? Us? including
No,
me?
I've, in gathering my thoughts and preparing for tonight's potential questions, I've asked all the staff that were involved. None of them were on site or interacted with any elected officials.
Did you find that odd, or?
No, I didn't.
All right, another question. Have you ever heard us, because you come to most of the meetings, discuss this as a group in public about this project?
I recall it being the subject of some of our efforts, my efforts, and T&M's in the recreation master planning. I remember proposing or recommending that either a ball field or a bubble facility or some other type of rec facility being considered at the swim center because it has the infrastructure. I don't have any specific recollection of the township committee delving into the proposed ball field at the swim center,
All
if
right.
that's your question.
Yes.
I don't have that
Recall us sitting
recollection.
here discussing it.
I don't have a specific recollection about that, no.
Now, on another project, say the 5 or 6 projects we did with the 2.5 million for rec, you were involved with that, correct? All the mini projects, the turf on Phillips Park, the lights for the girls, the drainage at Cross Farms.
I was involved in the early phases of that, Committeeman, where I was doing the, trying to do the inventory and the needs assessment and doing that bigger report. But then it did evolve into some part in the process where I was not always consulted on preparing the list of actual improvements being considered for the funding that was evolving. So I'm not sure if I was actually providing input on the list of $2.5 million worth of proposed improvements. I'm sure I had seen some part of it or had some limited input on it, but I can't say that I remember what was on that list of $2.5 million worth of improvements.
And do you recall this township committee discussing those projects? The turf, the drainage, for the 2.5 million. Do you recall us discussing that in public?
That I do recall hearing some commentary. I couldn't tell you what night or who was commenting, but I recall that being a
That we did
topic.
discuss it. All right, on one other project, have you or you're aware of yourself or any T&M employees doing any work on any of the township committee men's properties?
No.
So you're not aware, Ken, remember, you're under oath, that any work was done by T&M supervisory or work themselves on any of our properties?
Meaning township committee people's
Township
properties?
committee people, that's 5.
I don't think any work was done on any private property, but I would expand in my general understanding of what you may be referring to. I do generally understand that I was asked to look at drainage in Hayward Hills along a creek corridor and this drainage collection system in that neighborhood. And I am aware that there is a committeeman that lives adjacent to and lives on the property that the creek runs along. But I would not answer that I'm aware of or I personally had any work that I did on private property. That is not accurate.
So it's not accurate that any remedial work to his property was done or supervised by you or your employees?
That is correct.
And anyone else on that street get any remedial work done to their property?
Not that I'm aware of, Committeeman. But again, I did look at the drainage system in the neighborhood. I looked at the creek, I looked at the upstream areas, I looked at the downstream. When I was asked to go out there by the administrator to meet the infrastructure director to brainstorm on what the cause and effect of some of the clogs were and debris buildup and overtopping of the system. And I did go out there at least twice and looked at the stream corridor, the side streets, the collection system, and how to either divert some of the water out of the troubled bottlenecks or how to come up with some retrofit that might minimize the clogging of the collection system in future storm events. I was part of that brainstorming process.
And of course, you billed for that.
Well, yes, we did bill our time for that.
And it would benefit not just the one committeeman in question's property, would it benefit other people's properties?
It would have benefited anything that we brainstormed, as far as I recall, what we were thinking about and trying to achieve would have been a benefit to the entire neighborhood and the up and downstream properties of like 3 or 4 key bottleneck conditions.
All right, thank you.
Can I make one clarification?
Yes, please.
When you referred to the ball field project and you said something to the effect that the prep work that was done, I just wanted to clarify that me and my office were not involved in any site disturbance or prep work. When I was asked to look into the project and help move it forward, whatever prep work you're referring to had already occurred.
But what I meant was not just the physical prep work, there was intellectual prep work that you billed for, correct? On getting the site ready for the field. So why did you bill us almost $60,000 then? You did work.
Oh, well, yes, okay, if that's what you mean,
That's
the
what I mean.
the surveying of the base mapping, the topographic survey, the layouts, the concept plans, and ultimately the drainage design, yes, we were involved in that.
And that was all done from the administrator.
As specifically requested and directed by her, yes,
And the last time, nobody up here directed you in any way.
that is correct.
And would you provide me with that email from the administrator saying to go ahead with the work?
I will.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it, Rocco?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. So we're here tonight because on Tuesday, April 9th this year, a multi-million-dollar turf field project appeared on the bills payable consent agenda for bills over $3,500 without prior discussion or approval of the governing body. That meeting and vote did not happen. The mayor had stated he was pulling that item from the agenda because HYAA was promised numerous recreational improvements from the previous year. The mayor went on to say he saw an opportunity at the pool club and wanted to take advantage of it. On April 23rd, I requested an independent investigation into the resignation of our former CFO. I had great concerns about the integrity of management and alleged internal compliance issues. On May 21st, a project to install lights at this high school for girls softball was placed on the consent agenda. At that time, I requested a full accounting of all money spent on recreational improvements to date from the $2.5 million recreational bond. Specifically, how much was already spent or approved for our engineers, DPW, and various other professionals. We were told nothing was spent, zero. In the meetings that followed, we began to receive bills that amounted to tens of thousands of dollars from our engineering firm for work done and time spent for a turf field at the pool club. None of those expenditures were approved by resolution from the governing body. And I believe the question tonight is, and the purpose of these hearings, is who obfuscated municipal business and who misappropriated and who's responsible for misappropriating municipal funds, taxpayer money. And Fran, I appreciate you being here this evening. And when did you first become aware of a project for a turf field at the pool club?
I think it was the very first week of March.
The first week of March.
I believe so.
And how did you receive that information?
The administrator called me to request my assistance.
She requested your assistance for how?
She indicated that the infrastructure director was in need of engineering support and designs, support services, because there was going to be the ball field, a ball field proposed at the swim center location. She asked me to come to town hall and then ultimately get in touch with Victor Stevens and provide the engineering support services needed, to support the project.
Were there any meetings with our legal counsel? Were there any meetings with our any committee members, or with just the administrator, or any on-site meetings?
The only on-site meetings that I attended were myself and Victor, and then myself and my design engineer and/or Victor. I only was on site maybe 2 or 3 times initially, during our work on the project.
I understand. Okay. Were you aware, or did you ever ask if this project was approved by the Township Committee?
I know I was of the mind that they were, due to the idea that the administrator is directing me to proceed. Did I question that or know that to be fact? No.
You didn't call any committee members and ask if what we thought about it or how we wanted to see it played out? There were no calls, texts, emails, or anything to that effect?
No, the administrator was so clear and concise in the directive, and it was made very clear to me that this was to be fast-tracked. I explained initially in the very first conversations that this normally would take 3 or 4 months, and I was told she was expecting me to get it done in 3 or 4 days. And it ultimately took 3 or 4 weeks, so it was clearly an urgent priority, and quite frankly, I kicked into my process. I got my best guys, and I was trying to, deliver the engineering that was being asked of me.
Fran, no one's going to question the integrity of the quality of your work. I think the work you've done, but we just recently received. Who did this? This is what we wanted to know. How is this authorized? And how did we get here? And that's the purpose of tonight. And we recently received mountains of over 2,500 pages of documents. And thankfully, I'm retired now, and I can sit and read through all these things and go through all the documentation, but it's troubling that taxpayer money was spent without approval, without resolution, without discussion in public, and I'm a firm believer that we don't answer to a higher authority, we answer to the people. And the people need to have input on these projects. And this project specifically, didn't have input. But going back to Rocco's point about a project on Hayward Hills, do you know who directed you to do that project on Hayward Hills? Do you recall?
The administrator called me and directed me to get in touch with Mr. Stevens. And as far as I can tell, as far as my involvement was, we brainstormed some possible solutions and alternatives, and I did some research, some mapping, some very rough drainage area.
Do you remember the time frame?
I want to say, I would have to double check, commitment. I'm trying to think.
If you're not sure, you don't have to answer.
Yeah,
it's okay.
it's
If
hard
you're not
to
sure, you
read.
can check your record. It's okay. If you just remember the time frame.
I don't recall the season that it was. I know it wasn't the summer season. I think it must have been early spring. Because I think, if I recall correctly, it came on the heels of some severe weather, some storm events, a lot of debris washing down in the creek corridor, choking up the drainage collection system, causing flooding, impeding the flow of water. It was that kind of context that we were.
At any time, did you feel that there was a conflict of interest or doing this work with the on Hayward Hills? Was there any time? Did you feel that there was any conflict of interest being directed in that direction?
I didn't feel any conflict developing, and I referred to the surveys and the tax maps to ensure that there were easements that were encumbered on these private properties, and it wasn't just one singular property that we looked at, it was this whole area of the neighborhood. And anytime we contemplated what the options or alternatives could be, because we never got to a singular solution and no work, physical work was ever done, we always started with, is there a township-owned easement encumbered on the property that would give us the right to go in and maintain or repair the existing drainage feature, that being either the creek, the stream corridor, or the drainage collection pipes, inlets, etc., that might be outside the road right-of-way. So that was one of the key things that I constantly looked at, and in every case that I looked at, there was an easement that provided and actually obligated the township to go in and maintain, repair, and make sure that the water could flow.
Okay. Getting back to the pool club issue, when the bills started to mount, did you ever communicate with Donna about how much this was costing? Did you ever refer with our previous administrator how much this was costing? I mean, there's a lot of time put into this project. Did you communicate that with our previous administrator?
Yes.
You did. And what was the response?
I communicated with her in the form of a detailed written outline broken into tasks and what each task would cost. So there's a menu of subtotal, sub-costs, if you will, for probably 6 or 8 specific tasks that have to happen in sequence. Everything starting with the survey of the property, the conceptual layout, research, data collection, preliminary design, final design, construction documents, and the soil erosion permit, drainage calculations, which are pretty extensive for a project like this. So I wouldn't have started without giving her that outline and getting her her okay to proceed.
And you went over did you give dollar amounts?
Yes.
On how, and you gave, and this was approved?
She directed me to continue after she received that, and we discussed it.
Okay. And was verbally or written?
Everything I was doing at the time, because again, I was absolutely directed that this was a top priority and I had to do whatever I needed to do.
You were told that this was a top priority, this needed to be done.
This needed to be expedited.
Expedited.
Because ultimately it was geared up to be finished. The construction was to be finished for the fall season for sports. And what I did was, there was a pretty significant amount of phone calls because
clearly, yes, I mean,
because of the speed of this.
Yes,
and not every time, but each significant conversation or reassurance or direction, I would send an email back as we discussed, as you requested, as you directed. We're proceeding accordingly unless otherwise directed.
In your conversations with our previous administrator, did you ever ask about what the committee had to say on this?
I don't recall ever feeling that come to mind that was ever in question in my mind.
Okay.
And so therefore, I do not recall ever raising that topic. I don't.
Okay. Okay. And when the work was done, when the work was being done, was that work, were you documenting that work? Were you forwarding that work to our previous administrator?
In what form?
In any form, whether were you including any members of any employees of Holmdel, or any employees of Holmdel? Were they included besides our administrator? Were any employees of Holmdel included in those discussions?
Yes, they were included in some of the discussions, some of the meetings, and almost always copied on the email communications. I normally I would email it to Donna, mostly the administrator, and or the infrastructure director, depending on the topic or the subject of the email. It's my practice to typically copy the other, so if it was to the administrator, the director would be CC'd. I believe Bob Ward may have been copied on the majority of those as well. And then the folks in my office, probably 4 or 5 different technical people to try to keep everybody on the same page.
And when those responses came back, there was always the, I'm going to assume that there was always the presumption that the project was to move forward. Is that correct?
The presumption was always that, and there was never a signal verbally or in writing or in an email otherwise.
And, okay. At what time, at what point do you recall, to the best of your ability, to the best of your knowledge, at what time do you recall getting a message from any employee at Holmdel Township that this project needs to be put on pause?
What I remember is that April 5th was a Friday, and we submitted the soil erosion permit application, which basically was the culmination of 95% of our work. And I recall that it was sometime in May. I think it was in May. I'd have to check my notes. That Bonnie Hurd alerted me to the call that she got from someone in town hall that the administrator was suspended. I believe that was the time frame. So that's essentially when, this project in particular.
So when the administrator was suspended, that was the moment or the time that your firm was put on hold to proceed with this project. Is that accurate?
I'm referring to a few of my notes.
Sure, of course.
Commitments.
I
understand. That was my recall off the top of my head. I do remember that in April, early April, I believe when the former administrator was still here, we were advised that the project was going to be put on hold or suspended.
How were you advised?
I believe I was called, I got a phone call from Victor Stevens to say, hey, I was just told everything is to stand down and be placed on hold. And I remember that.
So our administrator did not call you, Victor Stevens called you?
I believe that's how I heard it first, and then I'm sure, again, I don't have the details in front of me, but I'm sure I spoke to the administrator that day. The administrator was, directly involved in the step-by-step, work that we were doing. So I believe I got it first from Victor that the project's been put on hold and we should stop. And then, because I remember it when speaking to him, I asked him, do you want me to call the other vendors, the co-op, field turf, et cetera, to alert them?
So the co-op field, so there had already been vendors to move forward that were selected, and how were they selected?
Don't know the answer to the second question, but I'm generally familiar that there's a co-op program where you can go in and purchase.
So the co-op program that Holmdel Township participates in.
That's right.
That's that's the company or the firm that was selected to install the turf field.
Yes, that's what we were told, and we were asked.
Who told you that?
The administrator.
The administrator told you that there was a co-op, that through a co-op we could do this project.
Correct.
That's correct, okay. Did you receive up to that time, up to that point, payment for any of the work done?
Up to the time.
The time that you were, at the time that you received a phone call from our head of DPW to stop the project. Did you receive any payments for that work?
I think we had received some partial payment before that point in time.
You did.
I believe so.
Do you recall how much that payment was?
I'd have to double check our records to see if the payment was in one monthly payment or if it was, partial payments. But I believe at that point in time, our records show that we received payment of approximately $26,000.
Have you been directed to do any other work in the town, not excluding excluding the turf project, the turf field at the pool club, excluding any other projects? Are there any other projects in town that your firm has been directed to work on that you're aware of without the governing body's approval?
I don't know, to be frank about it. I'm not sure if other projects, other capital projects of this size, type, or nature all were subject to action as a body or not.
Okay. I thank you, Fran, I thank you very much. Thank you.
So Mike, thank you. Greg?
So